a profound moral crisis. Pure, unadulterated greed gone crazy. The game industry doesn't want some of the money, they want all of the money. Dragons Dogma 2 has pushed many over the edge. Why does this pattern of exploitation keep repeating over and over again? As with most things, to understand their future, you only have to look into their past. The AAA gaming industrial complex is facing a profound moral crisis. The success of GTA 5 got to the industry so much that they started committing outright Grand Theft Auto on their consumer base. Not only are barely functioning full-price releases becoming increasingly prevalent, but the unscrupulous publishers that pump them out are content with monetizing every inch of these skeleton titles more comprehensively than American capitalism with obesity.
The people who reach into a carton of warm, crispy, golden, perfectly salted McDonald's world-famous fries.
And gamers are taking note. The disastrous release of Dragons Dogma 2 has pushed many over the edge, prompting a tremendous user backlash. Capcom's newest extravaganza managed to succeed at everything apart from the basics. It was critically acclaimed, but largely unplayable on PC, innovative in design, but old-school exploitative in its deployment of microtransactions. And so gamers responded in kind, with the scale of their Steam score downvote campaign and online condemnation forcing a well-earned apology and hopefully a full retreat. But why does this pattern of exploitation keep repeating over and over again when it seems to be so universally disdained? And can it be stopped in its tracks? Well, I'm here to answer this question, and I believe I can do this by diving into a thesis about microtransactions I developed following the release of Baldur's Gate 3. You see, when most gamers and pundits were in a state of euphoria, lauding the start of a new golden age of RPGs, free of simplification and exploitative monetization, I took a very different tone. That despite what I personally wish to be the case, for reasons that I'll explain, as long as the incentives were so skewed in favor of microtransactions and exploitative tactics, the Ubisoft or EA model will continue to be far more influential and popular than the Baldur's Gate one. Understandably, at the time, I received a largely negative reception. But in light of the Dragons Dogma fiasco, I believe my explanation for this admittedly pessimistic viewpoint can give us a decent vantage point from which we can understand the current circumstances. Before I do this, however, remember to like and subscribe. It will really help the channel. And if you're not enjoying the video, leave a comment. I'm actually interested in some constructive criticism. Emphasis on the constructive part. Anyways, back to the video. As with most things, to understand their future, you only have to look into their past. And microtransactions are no different in this regard. The easiest way to glean why they are so prevalent, why they have such a hold over the modern industry, is to understand why they emerged in the first place. Microtransactions, simply transactions in-game that require real money to complete, originate from the in-game purchases of 19's arcades. But when it comes to modern gaming, they emerged onto the scene in the late 90s and early 2000s as a fairly innocuous way by which devs could make money from otherwise free-to-play titles. But it didn't take long for developers to realize that this could be a great and virtually passive form of income for full-price titles as well. And this is where the most exploitative and controversial form of the microtransaction emerges. The first company to really jump on this bandwagon may surprise you though. It wasn't the usual offenders of EA or Ubisoft, but Bethesda with the legendary Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Despite its highly successful release, turning a mere profit was not enough for Bethesda execs. They wanted more. Traditionally, if a game developer wanted to make more money, they'd, produce a game or an expansion. But this was 2006, and Bethesda execs knew a much more convenient way to make money: in-game purchases. A month after release, they mercifully gave gamers the opportunity to purchase small downloadable packages of content from their website and over the Xbox Live Marketplace for the equivalent of between $1 and $3. Why this history is important is because while developers and top execs might continuously parrot the narrative that microtransactions were and continue to be a necessary evil to keep their companies afloat in an increasingly financially burdensome AAA gaming space, the fact that the modern microtransaction originates from a highly successful, very profitable release underlies a very different story. One of pure, unadulterated greed gone crazy. Now, I'm not saying costs haven't skyrocketed and closures aren't an ever-present reality of gaming. It's an undeniable fact that the modern game development process is exceptionally complicated and costly, with each stage carrying tremendous financial risk. AAA games are now commanding budgets greater than Marvel movies. Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, cost somewhere between $370 million and 540 million. And Baldur's Gate 3 most likely ranges into the 100 million plus category. So it's not a surprise that with this tremendous level of cost, there is a vast history of game companies who had initially produced commercially successful titles falling into bankruptcy. Telltale is the perfect example of a once beloved publisher who virtually collapsed after a string of bad games. But under every good lie is a half-truth. Because while costs have skyrocketed, so has the scale of the gaming market. As Baldur's Gate 3, Skyrim, The Witcher, Horizon, and so many other titles illustrate, nowadays if a release is actually high quality and resonates with an audience, it's highly plausible that it will shift tens of millions of copies, accruing hundreds of millions in revenue purely through the old-fashioned single purchase method. Remember when I said Red Dead 2 cost up to $540 million to make? Well, it's estimated to have made anywhere from $400 to $600 million in its first 3 days. But why wait 3 days for an extra $60 to $200 million profit when you can simply charge your existing player base for far more money, and damn the moral implications? Who cares if a 12-year-old maxes out their parents' credit card if you can make more money? And this is why microtransactions will continue at speed. They're simply a product of classic capitalist logic. Boost profitability of existing IP through whatever means necessary, and screw everyone else. Like the company that dumps oil into the sea or chops down our rainforest to set up GMO mutated chicken farms, the game industry doesn't want some of the money. They want all of the money at any cost. Damn the consequences. And unfortunately, microtransactions are where a large proportion of the money's at. The most profitable IPs held by the most wealthy studios are rife with microtransactions. Think of your Overwatches or CODs or GTAs, and you might think they're just catering to a bunch of unsophisticated kids. Yes, and that's why they make so much money. The possibly stolen credit card fueled microtransactions in these games make up around 30% of the global industry's revenue. Therefore, from the perspective of your average CEO, just selling quality releases free of microtransactions doesn't cut it. Just look at Microsoft's recent acquisition spree. They spent $7.5 billion on acquiring Bethesda's parent company ZeniMax Media, whereas how much was their latest bid for Activision Blizzard? $75 billion. It doesn't even come close. ZeniMax's studios have created some of the greatest RPGs in gaming history, not to mention one of the greatest shooters of all time, Doom, and yet these properties are only worth a fraction of a company responsible for creating the same Call of Duty game every year. And I can see people already saying in the comments, what if consumers rally against microtransactions and try to put pressure on the companies to stop? Well, there's a small problem with that. The only form of protest companies care about is that which hurts their wallet. EA was content for years to be the most hated company in the US, as long as they could continue to sell $1 trillion worth of copy-paste sports games. So a boycott is the only language they speak. Now I could see this working for smaller indie releases, but for their big budget cousins, I'm not sure. For a simple reason that with larger releases, millions of people center their whole personal lives around the next game, and would simply be too vulnerable to hype. Imagine Bethesda decides, we're not just gonna once by making the Elder Scrolls 6 a Game Pass exclusive, we're gonna go in for another round by adding microtransactions. As long as the game isn't a critical failure, can you really see fans who waited a decade for the next Elder Scrolls game simply refuse to purchase it? I very much doubt it. And even if they do, what about the large teen and child audience? For the record, I'm not saying this means we shouldn't try to do anything. The battle shouldn't go without a fight. But it doesn't hurt to be realistic about the prospects and perhaps consider regulation instead of simply protest. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you didn't, no refunds in your time.